Gu Qing is a lunatic. In her previous life, the Shen family was destroyed, her father died in vain, and the whole family of over 20 people were all exiled, except for her who stayed. She was brought home by her uncle and in the blink of an eye, she was sent as a gift to the notorious regent's mansion. And Regent Gu Qing was a madman who loved the human skin and beautiful lantern. Shen Ange was most afraid of it when he held the lantern and asked, "Is it beautiful?" Later, she died in vain due to investigating the case, thinking that she had finally been released. Unexpectedly, Gu Qing snatched her body. She thought she couldn't settle down, so she became a soul-like figure. She angrily swore that if she could start over again, she would definitely not meddle in anything, whether he was drugged or killed, she would not be able to see him. As soon as the oath was made, she was reborn in the blink of an eye. Following the oath, she diligently played the role of the eldest lady of the Shen family. First, she refused the ambiguous proposal from the Zhou family, and then at the banquet, she showcased herself by slapping the faces of those noble ladies to save face for the Shen family. However, she still met that lunatic. In the dark alley, he fell to the ground and the servant reported to Shen Ange, "Miss, you see how pitiful that person is. Let's help him." Shen Ange looked at him and saw that it was him. His eyes were completely indifferent and he hung high, saying, "Your young lady, I'm not a bodhisattva. I can't handle so much. Hurry up and leave." Keywords of the novel. Empress Dowager Charming, mad criticism of Regent King taking life to pet no pop-ups. Empress Dowager Charming, mad criticism of Regent King taking life to pet complete collection. Download TXT. Empress Dowager Charming, mad criticism of Regent King taking life to pet latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Nightmares. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Nightmares. In the 9th year of the Southern Dynasty, the 3rd year after the new emperor ascended the throne, Shen Nantian was appointed as a general. Shen Ange was overjoyed to see boxes of rewards being carried into the mansion. Dad's hard work was finally seen by the Holy See and received praise. Everyone came to congratulate him on his promotion, serving as an official for decades, pacifying several battles, and the people gathered around him. Today is Shanyuan Festival. My father has been on the expedition for several days, and I wrote a letter saying that he will be back home in the next 2 days. Shen Ange's joy is beyond words. My father and brother are finally coming back, and the family can reunite again. Little did they know that during this reunion festival, dark clouds covered their eyes. The heart of the ruler is unpredictable, and the loyal Shen family, with dozens of people in exile throughout the entire mansion, will never be recalled. The bright yellow imperial edict was thrown in front of Shen Ange, and the expression on his face, which was originally delighted that his father was about to return, changed in an instant. There was a black coffin placed in the hall, and she tried her best to stabilize herself and take a look. She didn't believe that her father had died like this. In a moment of confirmation, she collapsed to the ground. Shen Ange threw out the edict and helped his mother. The leading officer and soldier said, "Miss Shen, General Shen colluded with the enemy and betrayed the country before the battle. The emperor has a decree to allow his family to see him for the last time, and tomorrow, the Shen family will be exiled for 3,000 miles. Miss Shen, considering the past achievements of the Shen family, the whereabouts of Colonel Shen are unknown. You don't need to be exiled together with the Shen family." Ha! From a young age, my father taught me that as a vassal, it is my duty to share the worries for you, and to prevent the people from being displaced is my lifelong goal. How could he collude with the enemy? This is just a joke. She roared angrily, "Dad can't collude with the enemy and betray the country. The Holy See has investigated the facts. I demand to see the Holy See." The officers and soldiers replied to her, "This is a decree personally issued by the Holy Emperor. Miss Shen, please don't struggle anymore. The Holy Emperor will not see you." My mother was angry at the king in the court, talking about injustice and sharing her feelings with her father. In front of her, she accidentally bumped into his coffin and died. She didn't understand why a holiday that was supposed to be reunited suddenly turned out like this. She recalled her mother's advice with a wooden tone. Take care of yourself and live well. This night was a huge change, and the arranged marriage was also cancelled by someone. Pointing at her, she said those vulgar words, saying that she was a disaster, and killed her own parents. Now she also wants to harm her son. Watching her last loved one with her own eyes, Yunji was exiled but helpless. She was completely disillusioned and even doubted her existence. She thought she could get help from her uncle, but she didn't want to take her and lock her up in the mansion, just to give her as a gift to the suddenly emerging regent. My mother's advice lingered in her ears, and she decided to go with the flow, try her best to please him, become his medicine slave, and warm his bed in order to investigate her father's wrongful case. Heaven pitied her, and she let go of her dignity to survive. Finally, she found out the truth, but did not want to be defeated by force by the masked true culprit. Despite her desperate struggle, she failed to see her face clearly and ultimately died a tragic death. She hates why she didn't listen to her father's words and practiced martial arts well in the past, but now that revenge cannot be achieved, she has come to this end. If she could start over again, she would do everything in her power to protect the entire Shen family and eradicate the calamity for her father. I don't know if the resentment was too strong, unable to reincarnate, and her soul gradually dissipated into darkness. In the room, the young girl on the bed had fine beads of sweat on her forehead, her eyebrows furrowed, and she was clutching the blanket with both hands, her fingertips gradually turning white. Like being haunted by nightmares, unable to escape. In her dream, she felt her hands moist, and the bright red blood flowed down her hands, which was the blood of her mother in her arms. The crimson color made her feel like she was falling into an abyss of hell. Mother! Shen Ange suddenly sat up. The sudden shout startled Yunji from the side room. She walked over with a lantern and placed the candle on the table next to the bed. It was only then that she could see the fine beads of sweat on her own girl's forehead and the intense breathing fluctuations. She quickly called out, "Mississippi." Seeing that she didn't respond, she called out again, "Mississippi." Shen Ange's eyes were hollow, his pupils slightly dilated, as if he had been greatly frightened. Yunji took out a handkerchief to wipe her sweat beads and said with heartache, "Miss, haven't you had another nightmare?" Shen Ange gradually regained her senses. She stared blankly at Yunji, her pupils not as dilated as before. She asked, "Yunji, did your father go on a mission?" Yunji was surprised and frowned as she looked at her. Since falling off a horse and fainting a few days ago, she often asked strange questions and asked if the master was okay after waking up. Then he will touch the lady's forehead and ask about the wound. Where is the eldest young master? Today is a good day. Just ask the master if he has gone to war. Miss, the master is in the mansion and has not gone on a campaign. I am thinking that you have been having more frequent nightmares recently. How about inviting a doctor to come and take a look for you? It's also good to prescribe some calming decoctions, and you can sleep better. What time is it now? Miss Hui, it's time for ugliness. How many times have you dreamed about your past life? It's the third time. The images of her past life are still lingering in front of her, tormenting her with life. Whenever she wakes up, she always subconsciously confirms whether it is still the scene from the nightmare. She also doesn't want to dream about those things all day long. Perhaps it should be like Yunji said, to see the doctor and take medicine. Later, I'll sleep a little longer. Don't tell Auntie. The servant will wait until dawn to call the doctor. Yunji helped her lie down, and seeing that she was not yet calm, she raised her hand and patted her, sitting by the bed to coax her to sleep. Seeing her actions, Shen Ange smiled, and Yunji was only 2 years older than her. When she started doing things, she looked very mature. She patted and comforted herself to sleep, but couldn't fall asleep anymore. Yunji, you should go rest too. I'm fine now, she said. Yunji joked to her, Miss, when she grows up, it's like having nightmares before, but I have to be comforted to sleep by a maid. Yunji doesn't understand, and she can't just say that it's not a nightmare, but a real experience that made her feel like this. When Yunji returned to her sleeping place, Shen Ange had no intention of sleeping anymore. She placed her hands in front of her and looked carefully under the candlelight. These hands are delicate, white and tender, with a rosy luster. They are not as thin as withered and pale, and there is no red blood stained on them. Yes. She came back to life again. After her father was wrongly accused of colluding with the enemy and betraying the country, and died in battle, her mother went with him, while she was given as a gift to avenge her parents and died in vain. She came back to life, unexpectedly returning to the age of 15. On the day she woke up, according to Yunji's statement, she was at the racecourse that day, disregarding everyone's obstruction for the sake of Zhou Jing. I insisted on competing with the miss of the Prime Minister's mansion on horseback riding, but later fell off the horse and was sent back by Brother Jing. Ah, she chuckled softly. How could she have done such a ridiculous thing when she was young? No need to think, it must have spread throughout the entire Changyuan. Looking back now, she really wished she could dig a hole and get in. I believe it added a lot of troubles to my parents at that time. From waking up until now, it took her several days to believe that she had returned to the age of 15. This year, she had just given birth and was in the prime of her life. She had not yet engaged, her parents were still alive, Yunji was not exiled, and the Shen mansion was still as lively as ever. Counting carefully, everything was still possible, and Shen Ange's eyes lit up instantly, and his face also showed vitality. She put down her hands and looked at the moon outside the window. In this life, she must cut off all possibilities before it happens, and never repeat the same mistake. Yunji has always been cautious in her affairs, so she invited a doctor to come over at dawn, along with her own mother. As soon as he arrived, he directly entered the inner room and sat by the bed, while the doctor sat in the outer room waiting for the call. Auntie, why did you come? The doctor is with me, and I saw Yunji. I was afraid that your wound would be serious, so I came with you. Gur, is the wound hurting again? Shen Ange reluctantly comforted his mother and said, Auntie, I'm fine. It's just a nightmare these past few days. Please come and take a look, doctor. After Shen Ange finished dressing up, Shen's mother instructed Yunji to call the doctor in. After several inquiries, she took a silk cloth and explained the reason. It seems that the young lady has been worried too much recently, so she is depressed in her chest. When I prescribe 3 pairs of medicine for the young lady, I also ask her to relax and rest more. If she doesn't feel well, I will come again. Yunji escorted the doctor out, and Shen's mother looked at Shen Ange with concern. Gur, are you overthinking? What's bothering Gur so much? Tell her to listen to her mother. Shen Ange was about to explain that it wasn't a big deal when his mother suddenly realized and added, is that the young master of the Zhou family. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Youth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Youth. Shen Ange finally reconciled this matter and coaxed his mother away. As soon as her mother left, she was lost in thought. When the whole family moved to Changyuan, it was only a year of decline. At that time, across the street from Shen Mansion was Zhou Mansion. When she was young, she was rescued from the water by Brother Jing once, and later she followed him day by day. The voice of Yunji in the yard interrupted her memories. Miss Xiao is here. Miss Xiao. After a moment of confusion, Shen Ange finally remembered who Miss Xiao was. There was only one Zhao surname in the entire Changyuan, and that was Zhao Guogong Mansion, Zhao Jin, her close friend. Before she could react, her cheerful voice came from outside. Xiao Ange, I heard you were injured as soon as I came back. Zhao Jin's figure appeared at the end of the corridor, carrying a basket of things and walking towards her. Shen Ange wanted to go over and greet her. She looked over the corridor railing and walked directly through the pavilion. Zhao Jin reached out to help her. Hey, don't move, I'll come over. Miss Zhao. Yunji lowered her head and said hello, making way for Zhao Jin. Shen Ange told Yunji, go and get a cup of tea and dim sum. I will sit in the pavilion. Zhao Jin quickly stopped him. Dim sum is not needed, I can get it. Okay, miss. The wind blew from the corridor, and the small bamboo groves next to the pavilion rustled. Zhao Jin, dressed in light ink military uniform, helped Shen Ange sit in the pavilion. Since childhood, Zhao Jin has been a cheerful person and never pretends to be a daughter's family mentality in front of Shen Ange. Ange, I heard that you are competing with the person from the Prime Minister's mansion on horseback riding. Look, you have a lottery on your head, but you didn't win. Shen Ange wanted to refute her, but Yunji came over with tea and spoke up. Miss Zhao, you don't know that when Zhou Gongzi brought the girl back, he said that our girl would pull off the hairpin on her head and poke the horse in order to win, which caused the horse to lose control. Yunji opened her mouth, served tea, and then stood next to Shen Ange. Shen Ange ignored Zhao Jin's surprised expression and pushed the tea in front of her, pretending to open the food box she had brought. There are so many varieties in the 3-layer food box, and Zhao Jin's indifferent voice is in my ear. I thought you were sick, so I brought something different to change your taste. Shen Ange looked at her happily and said, I knew you were the best to me. Then you should get better quickly. Shen Ange looked at her. How long has it been since we last saw such a situation, and memories of our past lives flooded her face. Zhao Jin was a close friend of hers. They met on the street when they were young, and she fought with a boy. At that time, Shen Ange thought she was a man, and after winning, he saw her give a proud hum to show victory and retrieve her handkerchief. After the Shen family was raided in her previous life, Shen Ange also received a letter from her, encouraging her to wait for her return with peace of mind. Unfortunately, she was later sent to the regent's mansion and cut off contact until Shen Ange's death, and the two never met again. While eating dim sum, Shen Ange was sighing. Zhao Jin said inexplicably, this time it's for Zhou Jingba again, which made her choke. With a thud, Shen Ange pounded his chest repeatedly. Zhao Jin quickly brought her tea, patted her back, and asked her to follow. You have such a big reaction when mentioning his name. After finally recovering, she didn't understand why everyone said that. Did she really behave so clearly before? No, it's not. Ange, don't say I didn't remind you, that Zhou couple is not someone who can stand the stage. Shen Ange was not worried at all about outsiders hearing her words, and no one in the Zhao family could move her despite the 3 dynasties of Yuan Lao. After careful consideration, she also neglected some details in her previous life. Once she gave some dim sum to Jing's brother and parents, but when she turned around, she found that the box of dim sum was in the hands of the servants of the Zhou family. Whenever I call out to 2 uncles and aunts myself, their smiles never reach the bottom of my eyes. It's just that brother Jing treats me so well that she ignores these details. She chuckled back to Zhao Jin and said, I have a plan in my heart. If only you had a plan in mind. Zhao Jin came to accompany her for only a while, and someone hurriedly called her back to bid farewell to Shen Ange, reminding her to take good care of her illness and not worry, as she was always present. Last night in my dream, the cold wind was piercing through my bones like a sharp sword. When I woke up, the outside was full of vitality and greenery. Yunji took the clothes and draped them over her shoulders, feeling that the young lady had changed a lot since she woke up, becoming quiet and dignified. She thought it was the first movement of a girl's feelings. After all, the young lady likes Mr. Zhou, and she sees it through her eyes. They were childhood sweethearts, and they also had some friendship. Moreover, every time the young lady mentions Mr. Zhou, her cheeks turn slightly red and her eyes are filled with joy. Yunji secretly made up her mind. She could see that although Mr. Zhou treated Miss very well, the Zhou family's mistress was a bit difficult to deal with. If she married her, she would definitely protect Mississippi. And that's not what Shen Ange was thinking. She knew that the worries mentioned by the doctor were not due to Zhou Jing, but the name Zhou Jing had indeed been unheard of for a long time. Looking at the spring outside the window, she fell into contemplation. In the previous life, after my father was promoted to the rank of general, the Zhou family came to discuss marriage with a smile on their face. Thinking about this, she forgot that the Zhou family came to discuss marriage because their father had been promoted. At that time, she thought it was because she genuinely felt good about her that she came. At that time, she didn't know what was going on with the engagement, only knew that she could be with this brother who treated her very well, and they would never be separated. She was also very satisfied. Later, when she became older, her brother always talked about it. He said that she was going to marry off, and that all the dim sum at home were his, so he didn't have to grab dim sum at home. She was so red-faced that she didn't know how to retort, so she shouted, "Whoever wants to marry, I will not marry, and I will grab dim sum from you at home." At that time, Zhou Jing was considered top-notch in all aspects in this Changyuan city, and he was also a highly respected general. His future was limitless, and marrying him was also a good choice. Although Zhou Jing was a military general, he showed a considerate and subtle demeanor towards her, giving people a feeling of being bathed in spring breeze and very reassuring. She probably also liked the feeling of peace of mind, so when the Zhou family came to discuss marriage, she didn't refuse, and everything was up to her parents. I thought I had found a good person, but to my surprise, before we got married, the Shen family copied the family, and the Zhou family revealed their true colors. Coupled with the letters from the border at that time, Zhou Jing's life and death were uncertain. Overnight, the homemaker of the Zhou family no longer disregarded her dignity and came to withdraw from the marriage. She cursed her harshly and said, "Disaster stars, disasters, and husbands." They killed their own parents before passing the door, not to mention, but also their only son. She was isolated and helpless. She had hoped to have Brother Jing help her, but she didn't want the last straw to be as sticky as paper. She comforted herself and couldn't blame Brother Jing, who was also helpless. That year, she experienced the death of her parents and the whereabouts of her brother were unknown. Later, she was taken to her uncle's house and thought that she would help her investigate her father's wrongful case. However, she didn't expect to be locked up in the house for a few days. After coming out, she was given as a gift to the suddenly emerging regent. Counting the days, my dad's promotion day is approaching, but she always can't remember that day. Yunji shook her hand in front of Shen Ange and said, "Mississippi." Shen Ange finally regained consciousness and looked at her, "What's wrong?" Yunji was momentarily unresponsive and stunned. She always felt that there was an indescribable feeling in the girl's eyes now. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the mansion. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Promotion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Promotion. Shen Ange's courtyard was not far from the main entrance. When he heard the commotion outside, he called Yunji to see what was going on. But in half a quarter of an hour, Yunji returned with an extremely joyful expression. "Miss Hui, great joy, great joy. Listen up. The master has been appointed as a general by the emperor, and has been rewarded. He has been sent to the mansion. Let's go and take a look." Shen Ange was stunned. Is today the day when his father was promoted? Is the Zhou family also fast? Miss, let's also go and see the excitement. Shen Ange and Yunji arrived at the front yard, where many people had gathered to congratulate them. Father and brother were surrounded in the middle. In the crowd, she saw Zhou Jing and his parents at a glance. Her father never liked these flattering scenes, and after a few pleasantries, he hurried out and said he would have a drink again next time. Only Brother Jing stayed behind. Shen Ange knew that he naturally saw her. After all, Her father worked so hard to wink at her, so she understood why he left brother Jing alone. It was probably because his daughter was eager to create opportunities for her. She saw Zhou Jing walking towards her, and Yunji next to her looked very knowing. She wisely said, "There's something else to do in the kitchen," and then left. Yunji, you just sold me like this," and at arm's length, Zhou Jing stopped. Shen Gu fully said, "Brother Jing, be well. Sister Ange, are you feeling better now?" Speaking of which, Shen Ange felt a bit embarrassed, so he lowered his head to hide. That day, I had to thank brother Jing more. It was because Ange was not sensible and impulsive. Zhou Jing frowned. He felt that Shen Ange, who had been injured, was different from before. She was now estranged and restrained, unlike her a few days ago. Sister Ange, being injured is not like before. Shen Ange raised his eyes and chuckled lightly. What brother Jing said is tiring to stand there. Where should we go and sit, brother Jing? The two of them, one in front and one behind, maintained a suitable distance, completely eliminating the situation where Shen Ange had been circling around Zhou Jing before. He didn't know if he should describe it as a girl whose parents were older, or as a man with a different gender. The woman who used to say, "Brother Jing," one sentence at a time was gone, replaced by the dignified young lady from the general's mansion in front of him. He simply called out his name to evoke past feelings. "Ange, are you blaming me for coming late?" Shen Ange knew what he was referring to. If she was injured, it was the same whether he came to see her early or late. It was not before, so she just smiled. "Brother Jing, don't feel guilty. Ngu has already recovered." Zhou Jing from the previous life, like Zhou Jing from this life, treated himself extremely well. Shen Ange, who was this age in the previous life, did indeed have feelings for him. At that time, she didn't understand, but now Shen Ange understands. The Zhou family only came to discuss marriage after seeing their father's promotion, but they only valued their family background, not her. Marriage are not just about the husband, but about the family behind him. It is absolutely not possible for only brother Jing to be good, and one cannot drag the entire Shen family down. She couldn't tell the person in front of her directly that I was no longer the same Shen Ange as before. I knew we wouldn't have a good outcome, so I let it go. In order to prevent him from seeing the clues, Shen Ange had to politely distance himself, hoping that he could understand the meaning behind it. After saying a few words, Shen Ange became determined to drive others. He had already shown such obvious behavior, so he should have understood. "I'm a bit tired today. Brother Xie Jing came to see me, so I won't send it." Zhou Jing was urged to leave like this by her, but it did not meet Shen Ange's expectations. As a military general, Zhou Jing could not understand his daughter's ever-changing thoughts. He only thought that Shen Ange was annoyed and did not express his feelings. At present, he decided to have his parents come to discuss marriage early and marry the person he fell in love with at first sight. Shen Ange bid farewell to Zhou Jing and arrived at the main hall. As soon as he stepped in, 3 lines of sight fixed on her. Finally, Shen's mother spoke up, "Why don't you leave Mr. Zhou for dinner?" "Mother, Zhou Gongzi has his own family, why did he stay for meals?" Shen Bai also looked confused. Doesn't his younger sister like the young master of the Zhou family anymore? He even went to say hello specifically to let Zhou Jing treat her better in the future. Everyone didn't understand her for a moment and looked at each other, exchanging glances. Shen Ange ignored their eyes and sat down calmly, calling on the maid to pour a cup of tea. "Dad, why did your majesty promote you to the position of general?" It's strange to say that before the Shen family moved to Changyuan, she had memories of her father serving as a second-rank deputy general for a long time. He only made a few small contributions in 4 military campaigns, and the rewards given by the emperor were only silver, unlike General's son, who carried several boxes of rewards into the mansion. Shen Nantian replied to her, "I don't know either." In the early morning, Your Majesty said that I followed General Sun on several expeditions and served as a pillar of the country, which deserves to be rewarded. I am not the only one receiving rewards, but I am the only one being promoted. Perhaps it is the time for employment." Upon hearing this, Shen Ange asked a question in his heart. "Dad, does General Sun have a reward?" "No." Shen Ange glanced at his father and brother, both of whom had the same expression. Father and brother had the same temperament, and only obeyed the emperor's orders. They were determined to protect their country and protect the people from displacement. Nowadays, everyone else has been rewarded, but General Sun, who fought together as the commander-in-chief, did not receive any rewards. It is not difficult to guess what the emperor meant. "Sister, what do you mean by this question?" Shen Nantian expressed her thoughts in her heart. "Gu, there are not many commanders in the current military, and there are not even a few. It is necessary to have a commander in the military. Your Majesty's move may also be aimed at stabilizing the military's morale." Upon hearing Shen Nantian's words, Shen Bai also recognized the truth behind it. Dad is right. Where did my younger sister go? How come I didn't realize when my younger sister would also consider these things? Shen Ange could only say that he likes to read military books recently, so he thought more and tried to avoid it. Although it is not possible to discuss the king, there is something suspicious about this matter, and Shen Ange has to keep an extra eye on it. He has just taken office and hopes that nothing will happen. Never let the scene of the previous life reappear. Dad died in battle, brother's whereabouts are unknown, and before her death, she only saw the mark on the killer's shoulder, but did not see his face. The atmosphere in the hall became more serious. Shen's mother saw that no one was speaking, so she spoke softly and said, "Singer, your father received a reward today. For dinner, we ordered the kitchen to cook a few dishes. Let's also celebrate." These things are enough for her to worry about alone, and then Shen Ange responded to Shen's mother with a smile, "Mother is thoughtful. Father and brother have worked hard, so it's time to celebrate. This reward came inexplicably, but fortunately, it is what my father deserves." Feeling happy, the servant brought a letter of worship, saying it was handed over by the Zhou family. He came to visit the mansion tomorrow to congratulate the master on his promotion. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Discussions on Family Relations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Discussions on Family Relations. Early in the morning, Shen Ange was practicing calligraphy in the courtyard. Last night, when she heard that the Zhou family was coming to visit, she thought about how to do it. She looked up and saw Yunji walking over with medicine in hand. So he picked up his pen and continued to write. On the paper, there was a sentence. "Let the sky break, let it be with you. Yunji, what are you running for?" Yunji only revealed what she had seen after she had prepared the decoction. "Miss, Governor Zhou and his wife have come to visit. After hearing these words, I'm afraid I want to discuss your marriage to Lord Zhou." Shen Ange paused for a moment, but she didn't expect to come early in the morning. As Yunji spoke, she had already turned around and returned to her room. She walked to the bronze mirror and looked left and right, confirming that there was nothing wrong. She then took out some lipstick from her dowry and casually applied it. "Miss, this is..." Yunji said in confusion. "I'll go to the front hall." Without waiting for Yunji to return, she turned around and left. "Miss, haven't you taken your medicine yet? Let me warm up before I come back to drink." Yunji hurriedly chased after her and advised her, "Miss, the master is meeting with Governor Zhou to discuss your marriage to Prince Zhou. It's probably not appropriate for you to go rashly. How could anyone come forward to discuss marriage on their own?" Shen Ange ignored it and raised his hand to let her go back. It was precisely because she was discussing her marriage that she wanted to go even more. In the main hall of the Shen mansion, Shen Nantian and Zhou Shichang sat on the main seats, with their mother and Lady Zhou sitting below, drinking tea and discussing the martial arts examination. Although Zhou Shichang was not able to witness it with his own eyes, he also heard a bit about it. His face was full of pride, and the reason was none other than that he heard that the emperor had a special fondness for Zhou Jing. Although the decree has not yet been issued, he believes it is a matter of time. Have you heard that Zisheng also participated in this exam? Shen Nantian took a sip of tea, looked at the lady below, and said the main question. It's really better than blue. Zisheng will definitely live up to his expectations. Zhou Jing, with the courtesy name Zisheng, can be seen from his name that he has high expectations. When the Shen family moved to Changyuan, across the street, they saw him practicing martial arts at a young age, diligently taking horse steps every day to lay a foundation. Speaking of this, Zhou Shichang felt a third proud in his heart. He even unconsciously raised his tone a few degrees and boasted, he's just spoiled. He didn't tell his parents when he participated in this exam. If he could earn a name, it would be fine, otherwise. Zhou Shichang paused and said, otherwise, it might become a joke for the entire Changyuan. This strategy discussion, Zisheng's article has also received praise from the emperor. Brother Zhou, Zisheng's future is limitless. Shen's mother listened to Shen Nanshan's praise below, suppressing the urge to give him a cold eye. Although her son's performance in the exam was also good, she never saw him praise him. A sudden cough brought Zhou Shichang, who was speaking, to a sudden halt. Of course, he knew what his wife meant and his words could not deviate. Before leaving, she repeatedly instructed that the Shen family was different now, and the daughter of the Shen family loved Jing'er. She must take this opportunity to become this marriage. When Zhou Jing was 8 years old, he saw a house moving across the street at the entrance and went to call his parents to come and see. Zhou Shichang didn't say anything, but Mrs. Zhou was very disgusted, each one being from the countryside. Later, Zhou Jing saved Shen Ange, and Shen Nantian brought his wife to come and thank him. He pretended to be generous and said he wanted the children to come and play more, but he instigated his husband not to come and go. As an official in the same court, she also looked down on the Shen family's official position. When Zhou Jing grew older, she wholeheartedly paved the way for him, saying that he would marry a princess in the future. However, she only dared to talk about these things in her own courtyard. In the past, Shen Ange followed behind Zhou Jing and she didn't know it, but she didn't like it. Now that Shen Nantian has been promoted to general, she has come knocking on her door. Su Yuzhen glanced at Shen Nanan, knowing exactly what these two people meant. If it weren't for Song Heir's liking, she wouldn't even want them to enter the door. Brother Shen, we are here today to propose a marriage for Zisheng. Our 2 children are childhood sweethearts, and we, as elders, value their friendship. So, how should Brother Shen consider this? Shen Nantian silently picked up a teacup. He understands. He also knows his daughter's thoughts, but he is angry. From the age of 5 to now, there have been many days during which the Zhou family has not been here, but he happened to come after his promotion. Zhou Jing is a good child, but his parents are not very good. Seeing Shen Nantian not speaking, Zhou became anxious and smiled, saying, Brother Shen, and Gu is a good girl. She is lively and lovely, and she is beautiful. My family has a beautiful family. If we could have Ngu as a good wife, he would definitely be able to change a lot. Shen Ange walked outside the door and heard the few words spoken by Zhou. She smiled. The place she had once despised had now become a virtue. In her past life, her malicious words, such as those that were not dignified and virtuous, still lingered in her ears when she went out to wander. Shen Nantian was about to agree when Shen Ange stepped in with a naive smile on his face. Dad, I heard that Uncle Zhou and Aunt Zhou are here. Shen Nantian really didn't expect her to come, it was quite unexpected, and all 4 lines of sight rushed over. Shen Ange bowed gracefully and said, I have seen Uncle Zhou and Aunt Zhou, I have seen father and mother. Shen Nantian spoke up and said, you don't need to be too polite with your dad. Why did you come here? My daughter heard about Uncle Zhou and Aunt Zhou, so she came to pay her respects. Upon hearing Shen Ange say this, Shen Nan naively thought she was rushing to marry the Zhou family, and even Shen's mother's expression was clearly sad. The Zhou couple across from each other are extremely happy. Unexpectedly, the conversation changed, and Shen Ange's words left Zhou Shichang and his wife lost in thought. Gu Er just heard a few words from Aunt Shen at the door, wanting to explain. Back then, Ange was only 5 years old, and brother Jing was only 8 years old. It was just a coincidence that brother Jing saved him, so Ange was better to brother Jing. Throughout, brother Jing has been with Ange like an elder brother, and Ange knows it. I just didn't expect this move to cause Uncle Zhou and Aunt Zhou to misunderstand something. Fortunately, I had time. If I clarify it later, I'm afraid it might delay brother Zhou. For a moment, the hall fell silent. Shen Ange suppressed the calculations of the Zhou couple one by one, not only without showing face, but also with the help of Zhou's older brother. Shen Nantian and Su Yuzhen were stunned for a while before they realized and agreed with Shen Ange. Brother Zhou, you see, it turns out we misunderstood. Unfortunately, Zisheng is a talented person and deserves recognition. It's my Shen family who didn't have this fate. Fortunately, I have been praising the young master of the Zhou family just now, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to say these words at this time. Yeah, Shen Lang is right. Zisheng is a very good child, but unfortunately he didn't have this fate. Shen Ange kept his eyes down, following his eyebrows, without feeling that his grand explanation was inappropriate. The Zhou couple's face was not very good, although they tried to conceal it, they only had to say a few words about the situation before leaving. Shen Ange thought to himself, unsure of what Mrs. Zhou would say in private. Undoubtedly, as a young lady who has not yet left the cabinet, speaking these words openly is somewhat out of line. Since ancient times, the words of matchmakers ordered by parents have not been able to be spoken by the young lady's family. Do you know that when the Zhou family came to her door, she only had one thought in her heart, which was to stop. After a while of silence, Shen Nantian finally spoke up and asked her, Gu Er, do you really don't like that Zhou Jing? Shen's mother also puzzled and said, yes, Gu Er, are you really unwilling to marry the Zhou family? Shen Ange said, father and mother, if the Zhou family really intends to get married, they can invite a matchmaker to come and propose marriage as early as the day of Gu Er and Ji, or they can also make a marriage agreement beforehand. Although brother Zhou is good, Gu Er doesn't want to marry someone who is so influential. Shen Nantian didn't expect that she, who had always been closely following Zhou Jing, would undergo such a great transformation. Her previous behavior could be considered as not marrying Zhou Jing. Well, it's not sweet to try to twist and twist. It's hard for you to think of a song. Su Yuzhen also sighed and held Shen Ange's hand, saying, my singer has grown up, and the matter of getting married is not urgent. My mother will find a suitable husband for you. The sunlight slanted into the main hall, resolving the matter and making Shen Ange much more relaxed. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Solution. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 6. Incense application. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Incense application. Perhaps due to the experience of rebirth, Shen Ange believed in the gods and Buddhas, thinking of going to offer incense today. Last night, she sent someone to take a shower with some petals, wash and change into a pure inner garment. A rare night without a dream, facing the bronze mirror, Shen Ange couldn't help but laugh at her own rosy complexion, plump cheeks, and white jade-like skin. She was truly 15 years old. She asked Yunji to casually apply some makeup to herself. Yunji rarely saw her look like this. Although her hands were busy, her mouth was not idle. Miss, you didn't know that you only rejected the Zhou family's marriage yesterday. Today, a matchmaker came to propose marriage. Shen Ange listened without saying a word. Yunji looked slightly proud and said, "A few days ago, those official ladies said that you don't know the height of heaven and earth. Anyway, you have already rejected the Zhou family." Shen Ange had no choice, his image of being a cowhide candy really deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Now that he has made such an unexpected behavior, I'm afraid the whole city will know. I just hope that today's trip won't meet anyone. The gate of the general's mansion still stands towering, and the guards have prepared the carriage. I saw my mother coming out from the side, and the maid holding a basket of incense in her hand. "Auntie, are you going to burn incense too?" Shenmu saw the fragrant candle in Yunji's hand from a distance. "Is Gu'er also going to burn incense?" Shen Ange smiled sweetly and said, "Yes, Auntie, I want to ask the Bodhisattva to protect you. Dad and brother are safe and sound." "What is this, mother?" Shen's mother looked at her and said in a spoiled voice, "Go thank Bodhisattva for making my song awaken and turn to the light." Shen Ange knows what his mother is referring to. The Zhou family is indeed a den of tigers and wolves, but what does this mean by abandoning the dark and turning to the bright? She couldn't help but cry and laugh in her heart. "Auntie, the wind is a bit strong today. Let me go on your behalf. You said you have a headache." Shen's mother touched her forehead, her singing became more and more attentive and considerate towards her parents. Although she still had a free-spirited personality, she eventually developed a dignified and virtuous appearance. "Well, Auntie does have a headache. You can go on my behalf." Coincidentally, she also wants to go and worship the gods and Buddhas, to ward off disasters and evil spirits. She knew that she would always meet Zhou Jing on this trip. After all, she only rejected the marriage a few days ago. She always wanted to make it clear that meeting him outside was better than him coming home in person. At the hour of Xizhen, as for Henyang, fireworks are flourishing. The carriage from Shen Mansion drove into Yongning Street, and it really hasn't come out for a long time. "Miss, in the past you used to ride horses on your own, why are you riding a carriage today? Moreover, Miss has become much quieter today. After falling, I dare not ride a horse again." The wind lifted the curtain of the carriage, and Shen Ange caught a glimpse of a carriage ahead. With tassels hanging from the corners of its luxurious roof, it was likely that it was not a wealthy or official family. When they arrived at Jingyan Temple, the guards brought horse stools and raised their hands to support Shen Ange. After touching the ground, Shen Ange realized that the carriage was also here. She led Yunji straight to the main hall, devoutly incense, and sincerely thanked her. "In this life, may all regrets be fulfilled. Coming out close to noon, I glanced at the sun in the sky and thought it would be rare to come out, so I had to walk around." With a growl, Yunji leaned forward and said, "Miss, are you hungry? There is vegetarian food in the temple, can you eat it before leaving?" Shen Ange nodded, she was indeed hungry. "Wait a minute, girl. The meals in Jingyan Temple always need to be reserved in advance. Let Yunji ask." Shen Ange grabbed her and walked away, saying, "I'm with you." As soon as he entered the study hall, Shen Ange felt a gaze fixed on him, searching for the source. Sigh, it was Miss Qiao Yulan from the Prime Minister's mansion a few days ago, probably from that carriage. My enemy's path is narrow, why did I meet her today? Judging from her playful appearance, the visitor is not kind. Yunji went over to inquire, and she got up from her chair and walked towards this side. A few days ago, I fell off a horse and heard that I hurt my head. Did I feel foolish and disfigured, so I dare not go out these days. Miss Qiao, it was my fault that day. I was too impulsive. I apologize for any offense, said Shen Ange fully, not wanting to entangle with her. This sudden transformation left Qiao Yulan stunned. Originally, she wanted to take this opportunity to humiliate her, but suddenly it made it difficult for her to do so. If it were to be spread that she, the young lady of the Prime Minister's mansion, was unruly and unreasonable. Qiao Yulan replied stiffly, Since that's the case, I'll forgive you. Let's just flip the page on this matter. After thinking for a moment, she couldn't help but feel angry and added, what qualifications do you have to refuse Mr. Xiao Zhou's proposal, to embarrass him like this? Shen Ange smiled and comforted her, Miss Qiao, you may have misunderstood something. I didn't have feelings for Brother Zhou, and marrying him also harmed him. Shen Ange lowered his gaze, but he couldn't see her meaningful expression and inquiry, do you really dislike Mr. Xiao Zhou? I don't like it. Xiao Yulan's smile grew bigger and bigger, accusing her with a haughty and arrogant expression. Are you playing with Mr. Xiao Zhou like a monkey? There must be someone else in your heart, right? If you don't like him and are always by his side, who knows what kind of annoying thoughts you have. That's how Mr. Shen's family education is like. I didn't expect the words and actions of the Miss Prime Minister's mansion to be like this, a male voice came from behind. Shen Ange only then realized what she meant by asking these words, in order to make it heard by Zhou Jing. Zhou Jing stood next to Shen Ange and looked at Xiao Yulan, saying, Miss Qiao, my personal matters have nothing to do with you. Xiao Yulan was impatient and spoke without hesitation, Brother Jing, she's just a woman with an ulterior motive. You heard her just now. She doesn't like you and still revolves around you. It's just waiting to find a better one before getting rid of you. Shen Ange remained silent and turned his head to look at the angry person beside him. Shut up. Xiao Yulan stomped her foot and couldn't get angry enough to leave. When Yunji returned, she saw her own young lady thanking Zhou Jing and quickly walked over. Master Zhou. Zhou Jing smiled and raised his hand to Yunji, saying, can you lend me your young lady for 15 minutes? Yunji looked at Shen Ange and received a look, saying, Miss, I have run out of vegetarian food today. I will wait for you at the carriage. Then she bowed to Zhou Jingfu and said, please see my young lady over to the carriage later. Yunji has gone far, and now there are only 2 people left. Shen Ange glanced at Zhou Jing, and memories of the past flooded her face. She blinked and concealed her thoughts. Now that their marriage has not been completed, his future may have changed. Mr. Xiao Zhou, Shen Ange politely blessed himself. Zhou Jing, who had always been polite, was not polite at the moment. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, quickly leading her to the corridor. Gur, but what my mother used to say made you angry. She's not that kind of person, and I wouldn't marry any princesses or princesses, do you know? Zhou Jing asked urgently as they arrived at a deserted corner. Shen Ange restrained her emotions. Zhou Jing was not in a good mood, and she could no longer follow her temperament. She had already thought about how to tell Zhou Jing yesterday. She pulled out her wrist, took 2 steps back, distanced herself from Zhou Jing, and then bent down to bow, saying, Mr. Xiao Zhou is too worried. Your mother's words are reasonable. As parents, we should always plan more for our children. Shen Ange paused for a moment, lowered her eyelashes, and said, since Ange was injured, she has been restless. Upon closer reflection, she realized that it was because Ange had already treated Lord Zhou as his elder brother, and his mother had come to him to propose marriage. Ange couldn't imagine being married to relatives like his elder brother. And a few days ago, under impulse, I did such a thing that would damage Mr. Zhou's innocence. It's really inappropriate. Young Master Zhou. Shen Ange frowned slightly, as if helpless. Young Master Zhou. Can you understand this? Although Zhou Jing joined the military at a young age, he never carried the military atmosphere with him. His overall demeanor remained elegant and easy-going, and his hand that he wanted to lift gradually let go. Upon hearing Shen Ange's answer, this expression was replaced by a sense of disappointment, eliminating the previous urgency. With red eyes, he asked, Singer, are you serious about this? Zhou Gongzi, when did Ange deceive you? Shen Ange whispered, I'm really sorry. Ange got into a mess when he heard about the marriage proposal. Yesterday, what Ange said in front of his uncle and aunt was considered impolite. If Ange sees his uncle and aunt in the future, he will apologize face to face. I came over today and Zhou Jing came to listen to her apology. I just thought a few days ago she complained that she had never expressed her feelings, so I hurriedly invited my parents to come and discuss the marriage. Why did she respond to that? Isn't it really frustrating for oneself? But when I saw her today, her makeup was appropriate, she even put on rouge, and her words were impeccable. No matter how she looked or acted, she couldn't tell that she was fake. We're used to be as generous as now, talking about these daughters' family matters. Saying a few words next to oneself will make one blush. But after only a few days of injury, did the past feelings disappear from her? What is the unspoken meaning of guer? Do you? Do you? Do you? In front of her, she opened her eyes wide and patiently waited for him to reply, her face unchanged. He couldn't say the last unspoken sentence and immediately looked away with a sad expression on his face. Looking at his expression, she also felt uncomfortable in her heart, but no matter what, for herself and for him, this marriage is absolutely impossible. Shen Ange was helpless, only she did this villain and completely broke his mind. So, this matter can be considered as coming to an end. Shen Ange and Zhou Jing walked together from the corridor, with a continuous stream of people offering incense beside them, and their voices were naturally heard clearly. The conversation between those two people, dressed in luxurious clothes, caused Shen Ange to suddenly pause, and his hair stood up like a frightened little beast. The words, Gu Qing, all fell into her ears. In her previous life, the words engraved on her bones and blood made her tremble upon hearing them. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Hidden Hazards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Hidden Hazards. The bustling temple is out of place with the stagnant Shen Ange. Zhou Jing sent her back to the horse carriage and used an excuse to say goodbye. Before leaving, he even glanced back at Shen Ange. Yunji leaned onto her wrist and said, "Oh my. Miss, why are you so cold? Although the sun is not high today, it is not low either." Shen Ange finally came to her senses. The palace rumors that those two people had just mentioned were yet to be investigated, but as she passed by, she heard the words of her illegitimate son Gu Qing very well. In his previous life, although Shen Ange lived in the regent's mansion for some time, he had never heard of Gu Qing's background. He only thought that he was the second prince who was in exile, and he himself had hidden his experience of living outside the palace well. No one dared to discuss anything in the court and public. At that time, Shen Ange first saw Gu Qing on the festival of sacrificing the moon. That night, she was sent as a gift to Gu Qing's dormitory, wearing a silk inner garment and a red thin gauze outer garment, revealing her beautiful figure. She had just woken up from her sleep and saw him sitting on the couch, cold and aloof, emitting a cold and icy aura all over her. A name made her shiver. Trembling, he knelt down and knew his situation clearly in an instant. He obediently replied, "Ange, Shen Ange." She thought that the regent, who was said to kill without blinking an eye, looked like a Rakshasa, but she didn't expect it to be as beautiful as the legend. Where did this illegitimate child come from? Think about it, how could this palace secret be known by ordinary people? She rejected her own speculation and concluded that those two people were talking nonsense. "I'm fine, I'm hungry." Upon hearing her say this, Yunji lifted the car curtain and said, "Miss, wait a moment. There are some people gathered here, and the carriage is a bit slow, but it's almost arriving at the mansion. Street vendors are doing business, and children gather in groups of 3 to sing nursery rhymes. Famous teachers and generals, Zilio, thousands of troops and horses avoid the white robe." Shen Ange listened to nursery rhymes and leaned on the car curtain that Yunji had lifted. The peace and tranquility along the way made her feel at ease. "Yunji, who does the white robe in this nursery rhyme refer to?" Yunji put down the car curtain and said, "Oh, the white robe. This white robe refers to General Sun and the army he led." Watching Shen Ange still puzzled, she explained, this nursery rhyme has been circulating in the city of Changyuan for a long time, because General Sun returns victorious every time he goes to war, so the people sing him. Shen Ange remained silent, with a pensive expression on her face. The carriage stopped, and the guards dismounted from the stool and asked her to get off. Standing at the door, she sighed as if this could throw all her thoughts out of the door, then picked up her smile and stepped into the door again. It's noon now, Dad and brother should come back for dinner. Auntie, I'm back. Auntie, I'm hungry. Arriving at the cafeteria, my father and brother had indeed returned. Shen Ange took off his coat and handed it to Yunji, then sat at the table and started eating. Gur, what wish did you make when you went to offer incense today? Could you please ask Bodhisattva to bless our Gur in finding a good husband? Shen Bai jokingly asked her. I thought she wouldn't pay attention to herself. Shen Bai was about to move her chopsticks, but I saw her stop and replied seriously, Promise, I beg the Bodhisattva to give my elder brother a good marriage. It would be best to be a sensible and charming girl. Shen Bai suffered from eating and was poked to the painful spot, so he closed his mouth. Since childhood, Shen Ange has known that her older brother has always favored bold and straightforward women. When he was a child, he threatened to marry a female general, and he disliked the style of a lady from a wealthy family. She was charming and crying. My older brother's whereabouts in his past life are unknown, and he did not marry as he had hoped. I hope he can do as he wishes in this life. After lunch, General Shen and his son were sitting behind the table in the study, looking at a city defense map together. Shen Ange was hiding something, and after much thought, she decided to go ask Shen Bai. At this moment, he should be with his father. She called Yunji to bring tea and headed straight to the study by herself. As she approached the door of the study, she calmed down and placed the tea in front of her father and brother. She spoke, Dad, brother, have some water and rest. Shen Nantian didn't lift his head and said, Good girl, let's put it aside. Shen Ange refused and placed the tray on his chest, whispering, I brought it because I thought my dad and brother worked hard. The two of them finally put down the blueprint. Shen Ange glanced at it and asked curiously, Dad, what is this? Changyuan City Defense Map. What do parents and brothers think of this? Shen Nantian did not reply to her, but Shen Bai replied, Tomorrow is the festival of sacrifice to the moon. The emperor has ordered a large scale event to set up sentries and inspectors. Shen Ange rushed to speak and took this opportunity to express his doubts. Dad, how could it be that you came to inspect? General Sun should have come. Shen Nantian put down his teacup and said, The emperor has sent General Sun to Suizhou. Shen Nantian frowned tightly and never let go. Shen Ange knew that if he continued to ask, his father would suspect him, so he took the cup and withdrew it. Returning from her study to her own yard, she kept thinking that the barren soil in Suizhou, close to the border, had never heard of an enemy invasion. Is there any banditry involved? What does the Holy One mean by this action? General Sun was sent far away, and a few days ago, his father was appointed as the general. Now, he has been appointed to take over the defense of the city. Alas, Shen Ange was annoyed that he had not paid attention to General Sun and the military situation in his past life. It is difficult to guess now. The imperial heart is truly unfathomable. If your majesty really uses his father to disperse military power, then in the future, he should remind himself that if we kill the chicken and respect the monkey before giving power, we must respond in advance. However, General Sun's family has not yet had an accident, so we cannot be in a hurry. With a commotion, she withdrew her thoughts and the servants in the mansion were carrying boxes of things. She stopped one and asked, What is this? Miss Hui, tomorrow is the festival of sacrificing the moon. These are the things that Madame ordered to buy, as well as lanterns. Returning to her own yard, Yunji was also tampering with something, turning her head to look at a lantern. Shen An, the singer, clapped and was scared, causing her to suddenly scream, and even the lantern in her hand fell to the ground. "Oh, girl, you scared me." Shen Ange laughed at her and said, "Being a thief? Or is this lantern ready to write some undisclosed secret?" "Miss, you're talking nonsense, there's nothing." At the beginning of the night, Shen Ange was going to wrap around Shen Bai and take her out for dinner, but only after watching him change into an official uniform did he give up. Relying by the window, seeing the moon gradually being covered by dark clouds, she lost interest in reading anymore and decided to sit back at the desk and pick up a book. Suddenly, there was a crackling sound of rain outside, and Yunji quickly rushed into the house, blocking her head. The rain came suddenly. It also evokes some memories. On rainy days, his enthusiasm is not high either. He always has a gloomy face, and the entire royal mansion is like an ice cellar. She couldn't help but wonder, where is that madman now? She seemed to react and patted her cheek, feeling regretful. Shen Ange, how could you think of that lunatic? At present, it's still important for father's business. Let Yunji pay more attention to his movements after tomorrow. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Sacrifice to the Moon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Sacrifice to the Moon. Early this morning, as it was the Moon Festival, General Shen and his son left the door early. Everyone in the mansion was overjoyed by the festive atmosphere, and Yunji took out the moon lanterns she made last night and hung them in the Yun courtyard where Shen Ange lived early. "Miss, how about I give you a unique style today?" Yunji held a plate of jewelry and arranged it one by one on the dowry. Shen Ange sat in front of the bronze mirror and played with it. Last night it rained heavily, and this morning the air was damp and cold. Yunji picked a cloak for her and asked her in her hand, "Girl, how about we wear this when we go out later?" "It's okay, but I need to go and say hello to Auntie first. Today, neither my father nor my brother can come back. In the daytime, there will be only myself and my mother. According to customs, I will make a mooncake for my mother to eat. Unfortunately, my cooking skills are not good, so don't spoil her stomach." So I went to the kitchen to pick up mooncakes and went to the front hall. Shen Gu Qing said, "Good morning, Auntie." On this holiday, Shen Ange's figure appeared in the front hall early in the morning, which surprised Shen's mother. "Sing quickly." She has really grown up and even remembered the customs of the Moon Festival. According to the past, she cannot remember so much, only her Zhou Jing young master. Now that she is clear with the Zhou family, she has also changed a lot. "Mother, please eat and watch." Gu Er originally intended to make it herself, but Gu Er's cooking skills are not good. "As you know, my mother will make do with it first, and in the future, Gu Er will learn to make it for my mother." Her words finally touched Shen's heart, and Su Yuzhen felt like she had a daughter growing up in our family. "My daughter will make wishes to the moon god, wishing the Shen family eternal peace and happiness." At noon, Shen Ange received a letter from Zhao Jin, inviting her to go out together after dinner, so she was preparing early for going out at night. As night falls and the lanterns begin to shine, even at the entrance, one can still see the lanterns lit up on the long street. Undoubtedly, the emperor ordered a grand event, and after dinner today, the market was crowded with people. Zhao Jin waved to Shen Ange from a distance, and as she approached the mansion door, Zhao Jin bowed to Lady Shen. The two of them, along with Yunji, went out on the street. Shen Ange was dressed in a goose-yellow long dress, draped with a white fur coat, which accentuated her jade-like skin and made it crystal clear. Her waist was adorned with a jade pendant and a clear and pleasant melody. Her long ink hair was casually tied into a bun, with a golden hairpin inserted at an angle, highlighting her elegance and elegance. In contrast, Zhao Jin was much more casual, dressed in men's clothing that was extremely neat and matched her temperament very well. Shen Ange waved and gestured for the little maid behind her to come and ask, pointing to a moon lantern seeking peace, "Yunji, do you think this one looks good? Let's buy it and go to the river to put the moon lantern, and pray for peace for our father and brother." The girl's choice is naturally the best, let alone the girl's innate wisdom. What do you think, Jean? Everything you choose looks good. Okay, then buy this one. After giving money, the three of them took the moon lantern and searched for a secluded corner along the river. Zhao Jin always had a boy-like personality, and even setting up the moon lantern was very casual. They squatted down, lit it, and threw it over to complete the task. And Shen Ange lit the moonlit lamp he had just bought, lifted his sleeves, and placed it on the river. He clasped his hands together and made a wish. The moon lanterns on the river flowed down the water, shimmering and drifting quietly, emitting a glimmer of hope. The girl crouched by the river, with a maid and friend standing behind her. They stayed for a while before coming up from the riverbank, and the place was a bit secluded. Yunji joked to her, "Miss, won't you allow anyone who wishes to find a successful husband?" The girl blushed and raised her hand to pat her head, saying, "Nonsense, I made a wish to marry you out early." Suddenly, raindrops fell from the air, catching everyone off guard. Zhao Jin pulled Shen Ange and ran towards the pavilion by the river. Fortunately, they arrived at the pavilion before the heavy rain poured down. Shen Ange patted the rain on his body and unbuttoned his coat, saying, "You two come in quickly. Although you're wearing a bit thick, it's still cold. Let's keep warm together." Yunji quickly held down her hand, wrapped her cloak back, and carefully reminded her, "Miss, don't worry about me. Your body and bones are already not good, so you should still consider yourself." Zhao Jin also pressed her shoulder and said, "Yunji is right. You should focus on yourself. I practice martial arts and can't stay cold." This was the first time such heavy rain had fallen during the moon festival, and a dull feeling was pressing down on her heart. Something was wrong, and Shen Ange's heart was not right. She always remembered the man who scared her. "Let's wait until the rain stops and go back to the mansion." "Miss, won't you go shopping anymore? Why don't we just browse now?" "I won't go shopping anymore." The rain suddenly came and was fierce and dissipated quite quickly, but it seemed like water could be squeezed out of the air. The rain stopped in half a quarter of an hour, and Shen Ange and his companions returned to the market and walked towards the direction of Shen Mansion. The sound of fighting came from afar, as if in the alley across the street. Shen Ange heard it. After taking a few steps, she finally sighed helplessly, "You guys are waiting for me here, I'll be back soon." Before Yunji could ask her, she quickly ran back and searched for her voice. Along the way, she was constantly pondering how to escape unscathed. Her father taught her not to turn a blind eye to death, but also taught her to consider herself when saving others. Unfortunately, there aren't many people around this alley, and I'm afraid that Jean won't be able to beat them. Otherwise, it would be good to shout and attract people to come and watch. Looking up, fortunately there were only two people who could be saved. The masked man in black in the alley pointed his sword at the person on the ground and said disdainfully, "Run, why don't you run? Hurry up and deal with him. The master said he wants him to die." Outside the alley, Shen Ange took out the fireworks that he had originally planned to set off by the river from his sleeve, but unfortunately it rained heavily and didn't work, which happened to come in handy. After lighting the fireworks and throwing them over, with a crackling sound, Shen Ange stood at the entrance of the alley and shouted for someone to come. Perhaps frightened by the sudden change, the two thought someone had arrived and were afraid that the situation would be exposed. They lifted their bodies and lightly jumped away from the wall. Shen Ange waited for the fireworks to go out, then picked up her skirt and walked in against the wall. The alley was too dark, with only a hint of moonlight shining in. It was then that she could see clearly that there was a young man lying on the ground, his face covered in blood, and his appearance was unclear. He was panting, his blood and dark clothes blending together. If it weren't for the strong smell of blood, it wouldn't have been obvious whether he was injured or not. Shen Ange squatted down with her skirt in her arms and patted his face, saying, "Hey, what's up with you? Hello." The lying boy made a sound and suddenly opened his eyes. The cold light in his eyes made Shen Ange instinctively take 2 steps back. She suppressed the urge to scream, calmed her mind, and kept a few steps away from him. Although she often followed her father in and out of the military camp, there was no one in the army with the same intimidating aura as him. It reminded her of Gu Qing, but her figure didn't look much like Gu Qing from a previous life. A few steps away, she felt safe and dared to ask, "Can you still move? I'll go call someone to save you." Shen Ange looked at the person in front of him. After speaking, she turned around and was about to walk towards the outside of the alley. With a snort, accompanied by the cold light of the weapons, a dagger landed at Shen Ange's feet, blocking his path. She exclaimed in surprise and took a deep breath. The dagger had just passed through the neck, but it changed its course due to insufficient strength. With lingering palpitations in her heart, she instinctively swallowed and stepped back, turning to face him. I won't harm you. Just now, I saved you," she said subconsciously. He thought she was going to call someone, and under stress, he threw out the dagger. The smell of fireworks was followed by a relaxing medicinal scent, a faint refreshing sensation. His vision was blurred by blood and water, and he couldn't see the person coming, so he could only hear her voice, clear and pleasant. He vaguely saw her trembling and reaching out her hand, throwing the silver money in front of him, reminding him to find the doctor and wrap the handkerchief around his injured hand. He did not stop her from flying away. Saving him and being afraid of him, it was none other than bait. His whole body was filled with a bloody smell, dirty and unbearable. And just now, he did want to kill her and silence her. Turning over, he lay on the ground panting for a while, then got up and picked up the silver from the ground, supporting the wall and leaving. Shen Ange ran back to the 2 of them, bending over and panting. Yunji said calmly for her, "Miss, where have you been? If you don't come again, I will go back to the mansion and bring someone to find you." "Ange, what did you do just now?" "No, it's okay, let's go back to the mansion." Shen Ange and the others left, and the rescued boy took out a pill from his arms and took it. He then followed the corner into a courtyard. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Sacrifice to the Moon, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Sacrifice to the Moon, 2. There was not a shortage of people on the main street, and the noisy scene was completely different from the silence just now. That dagger almost slashed through the neck. Damn it. Damn it. For a while, Shen Ange found it difficult to recover, and Yunji handed Shen Ange various colored mooncakes she had just bought. "Miss, you have always loved to eat fragrant things the most. I just saw some mooncakes with petals over there. Would you like to try them?" She remained motionless, and Zhao Jin felt strange. He stood in front of her and flicked his finger on Shen Ange's forehead. With a soft shout, "Ah! Jin, what are you doing playing me for?" Zhao Jin tilted his head to look at her and said, "Why do you think I'm playing with you? You lost your soul. You can't even see Yunji buying you mooncakes." Shen Ange looked down and Yunji looked at her holding a box of mooncakes. It was not intentional. The crowd started to gather ahead, and looking around, it turned out that the Moon Festival parade had begun. Zhao Jin reached out and pulled Shen Ange over. Shen Ange grabbed Yunji and the others stood on the street. 8 people, carrying large moon lanterns, gradually approached from the corner. Behind the moon lanterns were people carrying various colors of moon lanterns, and the parade procession was grand, shuttling through the moonlight. The moon god flowers on the trees on the street fall with the wind and sway throughout the streets and alleys of Yongning. In no time, the petals grew more and more, and the fragrance grew stronger, masking the strong smell of blood in the front lane. Under the sound of the piano, a trail of blood gradually opened on the window paper, followed by a dull sound of falling to the ground. The fallen slave had a fierce expression on his face, with long scars on his eyebrows. He was the same strong man who had previously assassinated him in the alley. Gu Qing stepped on the chest of the slave, crouched down, and pulled out a blood-stained secret letter from the slave's body. As he unfolded his gaze, a hint of harshness flashed through his dark eyes. There is indeed an insider around me, working in and out with this fool. 5 fingers clenched together, and a palm-sized secret letter turned into shredded paper and scattered from the fingertips. Gu Qing kicked the corpse under his feet, looked up and down, pulled out a token from his waist and glanced at the moonlight before hanging it on his own waist. Counting this, there were already about 10 yuan. The door opened a gap, and by the wall lay a fat man covered in blood, with a strange twisted figure. 2/4 of an hour ago, he stood outside the door mocking Gu Qing for seeking death, shaking a folding fan and sitting on a chair outside the door. 2/4 of an hour later, he was twisted off and thrown into a pool of blood, unable to shout or move. All the experts in the other courtyard were killed by him. Gu Qingyun, the prince of Nan'an County in Changyuan City, and his cousin, loved wine and sex. This other courtyard was where he raised slaves and concubines, so he chose this one far from the bustling city. Gu Qingyun's eyes were intertwined with anger and fear, as he watched as the black boy kicked the panting slave to death, then stepped on the corpses on the ground, walked steadily towards him, and then bent down. All the people you sent are here. The hair on his temples was stained with blood, which couldn't hang and dripped down his forehead, adding a strange and gorgeous touch to his pale face. With a flick of his finger, more than a dozen signs fell in front of Gu Qingyun like this, jingling as if it were a sound, laughing innocently and asking, "Can you count?" This action provoked Gu Qingyun, who trembled violently and spat blood foam out of his mouth due to shortness of breath. "Are you actually pretending?" "Why?" Gu Qing calmly wiped the blood from his hand onto his clothes, and only after it was clean did he enthusiastically pick up the conversation. "Why am I so skilled? I was tortured by you before." He seemed to remember something joyful and laughed. "The best hunters appear in the form of prey. Otherwise, how can they catch the prey I want? Hunting requires patient planning." Gu Qingyun widened his eyes, and everything had a reasonable reason. Gu Qing, this person, was willing to gamble his life and become the harshest hunter. He suddenly understood why the one in the palace was afraid of him. "No, it's not me." Gu Qingyun tried his best to explain, but could only utter a few broken words. The young man sneered and said, "Of course I know that you are not the mastermind behind the scenes. You are so foolish as a pig, and are only assigned to others as thugs." Gu Qing opened the door, and the concubine who was playing the piano outside shook her hand, making a mistake in one syllable, and the sound of the piano came to a sudden halt. Gu Qing's smile was so heartwarming that he said, "Keep playing." "Bomb. Of course keep playing. If you don't play, you'll only die." Gu Qing walked over to her side, regardless of whether she was playing or not, holding a dagger and swiping it over the strings snapped with a ding sound. The strings of the chain crossed my concubine's neck, instantly opening my throat and falling to the ground. Gu Qingyun panicked and began to regret it. He trembled and said, "Since you know, just let me go. I just assumed you never came." Under the moonlight, he stood in a pool of blood, his pale face contrasting with the color of blood. Gu Qing smiled nonchalantly and said, "Oh, I still want to thank you. You made a mistake. I came tonight just to kill you." Gu Qingyun, with blood foam in his mouth, muttered incoherently, Don't. I'll tell you everything I know." "Who is that woman?" Gu Qingyun was momentarily stunned and said vaguely, "Which woman?" "As soon as the person you sent to kill me left, she appeared, not to mention it was a coincidence. Moreover, how could ordinary women have the courage to walk into dark alleys? I was thinking that you finally got the hang of it and learned how to use people." He glanced at Gu Qingyun and said, "Don't say, that's just a coincidence. The people who appear around him either want him or want his life, anyway they all want him to die. Moreover, no one ever thought of saving him." Seeing Gu Qing's cold gaze sweep over, Gu Qingyun's body trembled and he sobbed, I really don't know that woman, I didn't lie to you. I really don't know. Looking at his eyes, it doesn't seem like lying. Is her appearance really unexpected? He shook his mind. Unexpectedly, the drunkard who had just died in a pile of corpses suddenly opened his eyes and used all his strength to swing out the wolf-toothed hammer in his hand, coming straight at Gu Qing. Gu Qing's body first sensed the killing intent and instinctively raised the dagger to block it. With a clang, the weapons collided and sparks were generated. Gu Qing heard a crisp sound from his wrist, and then the dagger broke away from his palm and threw it towards the slave. In an instant, the slave froze, his eyes wide open. Upon closer inspection, a thin thread of blood on his neck fell to the ground, completely silent. He frowned and, without checking for a moment, let him hurt himself. He shook his right hand, feeling no sensation, and hummed weakly. Seeing that his wrist was not under his control, he enthusiastically studied it for a moment and came to the conclusion. Tisk, it's dislocated. Immediately pinching and twisting the swollen area, with a click, the misplaced wrist was pulled back to its original position. From beginning to end, without Gu Qing blinking, he seemed like a painless wood, supporting himself in pain and fighting. He glanced at Gu Qingyun's wide-open eyes, bent down and lifted the dead slave with his intact left hand. With a body weighing 200 pounds, he easily grasped it with one hand and threw it across from Gu Qingyun. It seemed like he was almost there, so he touched his chin and adjusted the position of the slave to face each other. He took the wolf-toothed hammer and held it in the slave's hand. Stuffed a short blade into Gu Qingyun's hand. Gu Qingyun's eyes were filled with fear and confusion. In no time, he understood what Gu Qing meant. The Nannan County prince's mansion, unable to bear the oppression of the slaves, rose up in rebellion and attempted to kidnap the lord to escape. In a fight, the slaves and the lord perished together. Gu Qing smiled and said, Is my cousin satisfied with my ability to write storybooks? Is my cousin still satisfied with this ending? The candlestick on the desk fell to the ground, and the flames illuminated his thin and beautiful cheeks. Gu Qingyun twisted his body desperately as if seeing a demon, attempting to move himself to escape from life. Unfortunately, his hand and foot meridians were completely broken. He couldn't even shake off the short knife that was framed in his hand. Gu Qing admired his desperate expression, gradually disappearing from his clear gaze. The fire climbed along the curtains and instantly engulfed the entire room. Outside the gate of the prince's mansion, Gu Qing looked at the towering flames with a handsome and twisted smile. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Obstacles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Obstacles. Walking out of that room, Gu Qing stretched lazily and walked towards the back street. As soon as he turned the corner, Gu Qing spat out a mouthful of blood. He slowly sat down against the wall and reached out to wipe the sticky crimson blood from his mouth. Before entering the prince's mansion, he had already suffered an internal injury, and the surprise attack he made just now was the limit of his ability to hold on to the present. The line of sight began to blur, and the hand in front of me had a double shadow. After sitting for a while, he got up and walked forward again, but not long after turning left, blood gradually overflowed from his mouth and nose. Tonight, there is a fire in the royal mansion, and we will carefully investigate and prepare in advance. Gu Qing stumbled and his figure was unstable, but he couldn't hold on to his injuries and fell head down in the alleyways of Yong'an. Without strength, he was too lazy to move. Perhaps due to excessive bleeding, his body temperature was slowly losing and his body was trembling slightly. Ha! There was a hint of contentment. The Moon Festival parade was interrupted shortly after, interrupted by the flames across the street. When people noticed the fire, there was not much left. That night, additional officers and soldiers were dispatched to drive away the crowd on the street. Shen Ange saw her father and brother running towards the big fire, and she shouted to them to be careful. Shen Bai arranged for someone to escort them, but few people in the swaying carriage spoke. Zhao Jin stopped the carriage. "Ange, you guys go back. Although it's not worth it today, I'll still follow Captain Shen to take a look." As she spoke, she jumped off the carriage and waved her hand towards the two people inside. The carriage of Shen Fu avoided the crowd and took a detour in the middle of the road. Sigh. In the alley, the light was dim, and the carriage was obstructed by obstacles ahead. The guards quickly pulled the reins, and the steed let out a cry due to the sudden pull back. On the swaying carriage lantern, the word Shen Mansion is clearly visible. Suddenly parking, Shen Ange swayed and almost bumped into the car wall. Yunji quickly grabbed her. "Miss, are you okay?" Shen Ange shook his head and frowned. "What's going on?" "Miss, is there a person lying in the middle of the road ahead?" "Miss, don't worry, I'll go take a look." "Wait a minute." Shen Ange stopped him, and Yunji lifted the car curtain and looked along the dim light of the lantern. There was indeed a black outline not far ahead. "How do you lie in the middle of the road?" "If it weren't for the sharp eyes of the guards, I'm afraid he would have already become flesh and mud. It's ultimately a human life, and we can't just let it go." Shen Ange said, "Be careful, today is the moon festival. You may be a drunken person. Go and wake him up and move him to a safe place." The guard received the order and walked towards the dark figure with a lantern in hand, in case of emergency. He also held a sword in his left hand. "Miss, it's windy outside, don't look anymore." Yunji gathered up her cloak for her, afraid that she might catch a cold. Not long after, the guard ran back and reported from outside the car, "Miss, it's not a drunken man, it's an injured young man." Upon hearing this, with the help of Yunji, she bent down and crawled out of the carriage. Yunji, holding a lantern, followed by the guards and went to inspect together. The wind in this alley was a bit strong, and as it blew her dress, Yunji stood up to block it for her. The guard moved the lantern in his hand forward, spreading warm light on the ground, illuminating the pale face of the young man. Shen Ange and the maid stood behind, not seeing very clearly. So she walked up and took the guard's lantern closer, only to see the boy's features clearly. With the clothes on her body, Shen Ange suddenly thought of the boy she had just saved in the alley. She stopped in place, hesitated for a moment, as if trying to take a closer look at his eyebrows and eyes, gradually furrowing her brows. Yunji saw her own girl staring at a young man like this for the first time, without blinking, although the young man was indeed a bit good-looking. "Cough, girl, what are you looking at?" Shen Ange suddenly returned to his senses as if frightened. "Ah. I'm asking, what are you looking at, girl?" Shen Ange couldn't tell Yunji, she couldn't say that this person's eyebrows and eyes looked like that crazy person who hadn't grown up yet. She instinctively shuddered, was it really him? Calculating the time, at this point he will only look like 20.1 or 12. Will Gu Qing's previous appearance be like this? Previously, in the alley, his face was covered in dirty blood and he couldn't see clearly, otherwise he wouldn't have been scared like he is now. Shen Ange looked around, and the wind blew down the petals of the moon god, covering the ground with a faint fragrance. If this was really him, then it was really fate. He was so embarrassed in such a great scene, how could the Regent King, who was so high in his previous life, be so miserable? Was someone hurt to this extent? "Miss, he seems to have fainted." The guard sounded a reminder, and Shen Ange squatted down to take a sniff. It was okay, but still angry. After all, it was a human life, and saving him would be considered less trouble for his father. It was not yet known whether that person was there. Shen Ange instructed the guards to move him into the car. Yunji took her hand and said, "Miss, that person is covered in bloodstains. Do you really want to save him? What if he's not a good person? He's also a human life, we can't just leave him alone. Just find a medical clinic for him. At present, we cannot leave him here to fend for himself." The narrow shaking space was filled with a warm fragrance, which was completely opposite to the strong bloody smell on his body. The faint medicinal fragrance carried the softness and sweetness of a young girl, which was the scent he had smelled before. Subconsciously, Gu Qing was about to take a short knife from his body to defend himself, but he didn't want to touch the soft material, which was a bit small and just covered his body. His eyes shifted downwards, and it was clearly a moonlight white cloak belonging to his daughter's family. The injured areas were also bandaged and secured. Looking sideways, I really saw a graceful figure sitting in the distance, leaning against the car wall. Her eyelashes are half closed, her lips are tightly pursed under her beautiful appearance, and her long eyelashes flicker, showing extreme warmth under the shadow of the lamp. This is the second time she saved herself again. How could it be so coincidental every time? He touched the short blade on his body and held it in his hand, as if it could add a little sense of security. Even women cannot be taken lightly. The person sitting noticed his gaze, turned around, and her eyes met. She was taken aback for a moment, not expecting him to wake up so quickly. In fact, just now Ange's hair stood up, and there was a familiar feeling. He turned his head, but did not want to be directly in his sight, which was exactly the same as that madman felt when he saw her. She was stunned for a moment, her foggy eyes shining slightly, which made her feel numb. She didn't like it, so she frowned and said in a slightly sullen tone, "Wake up." Gu Qing also didn't know who she was angry with for being so talkative. Every time she is in trouble, she always appears in time, afraid of him saving him. Her expression and tone are either surprised or angry. She is really a contradictory woman, interesting, really interesting. In his confusion, he seemed to hear the word Shen. In the entire city of Changyuan, there was only one household surnamed Shen, whether by coincidence or deliberate arrangement. She has secrets she doesn't know. My thoughts flew around, and now Gu Qing spoke in a hoarse voice, "Miss, do you recognize me?" End of this chapter.